Hello, everyone. I'm Nina Gopal. Welcome to Global Express. Today, we're looking at the Harris versus Trump showdown that is likely to come to a head in less than 50 days. And of course, its impact on the world and on India. This may well be the last debate between the two American presidential candidates, former US President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, before polls which are less than 2 months from today. Or it may not. Kamala Harris has thrown down the gauntlet. She's said she's open to another debate in October. It remains to be seen if Trump bites, because Kamala did give him quite a mauling, repeatedly mocked him for a multitude of sins. And Trump got a couple of, I think, jabs in as well. So what came through were their starkly different views, on abortion, on immigration, on American democracy, tackling dictators, because Harris said she said she told Trump they would eat him for lunch. And she also said that people were leaving his rallies. Harris was sharper, much sharper than Biden. And but at the same time, there's this big question that I have about this he said, she said thing that went on, this nasty, but extremely personal attacks. I mean, Harris ended up calling him a liar. What are we to expect? I mean, do we think that there is going to be an impact of this, or will has this just gone over everybody's head? Because I mean, there are issues that face the world which are also equally important, which Biden had found it very difficult to tackle, which is Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, China, and of course, where does that leave India? India is caught in a peace trap. It's been nudged by Washington and the West, and it's being asked to make peace with Russia. And of course, there's China's creeping territorial expansion. Talking to us today, our journalist and prolific columnist, Washington-based Seema Sirohi. She's covered India-US relations for some 30 years now and authored a book, Friends with Benefits, India-US Relations. Welcome, Seema Sirohi.
Thank you. Thank you.
Also on the show is Manoj Kewalramani, who heads the China Studies program and is chairperson of the Indo-Pacific Research Program at Takshashila Institution, a leading Indian public policy think tank. Manoj's research covers Chinese politics, foreign policy, and approaches to new technologies. Welcome, Manoj Kewalramani.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's begin with you, Seema. Do debates actually impact the race? I mean, will it translate into a big shift? Most American elections are very tight, and virtually all the polls in the past have rarely seen high ratings over debates translating to votes. So will this be any different? I mean, you've got the latest ABC poll, which hosted the actual debate, which put Kamala Harris at only 47% and Donald Trump at 44.4%. And then there were these two instant polls, right? I mean, CNN showed Harris winning the debate at 63%, and there was a YouGov poll showing her winning 54 to 31 among voters. So does a strong debate translate into a White House victory?
Look, thank you for having me. The main question is that since Kamala Harris came on the scene so late, that her performance in the debate, if it had bombed, then it would have harmed her. But because she did well, it cannot hurt her. Yes, you're right that debates rarely will affect the actual vote. The thing to remember is that Trump has held his base and his core support despite 2 impeachments, despite 88 charges against him, despite conviction on 34 counts, despite this and that. So the Harris campaign completely understands that. So all their emails after the debate have been along the lines that debates don't win elections. So both sides get that. The fact that she did well helped somewhat. She managed to clarify in front of the voter who she is and paint somewhat of a contrast, which would be helpful with the independent voters, people who don't know her at all. So, to that extent, it's helpful to her.
So
You
basically, what you're saying, Seema, is that after the debate was over, there were a whole load of comments made, which basically saw Kamala Harris for who she was. Except there is some criticism that she only just mentioned her, her mother in passing, and the fact that she is an immigrant too, in many ways. I'm not now, but I mean she's a child of immigrants too. And would that have gone down? Would that have been a little bit? Couldn't she have played that up a little more?
I don't think so. That would have been politically harmful, I would say, because immigration is a big negative issue in this election campaign. She did mention her mother, and I know people in India want her to, keep talking about her Indian heritage, but this is America, and the politics here are very different. Right now, she has to somehow get over this huge problem of illegal immigration that happened under the Biden administration. And Trump is hammering them on that. And if she starts talking about her background, that's not going to be helpful.
But at the same time, on the issue of race, I mean, Trump did question her racial identity. He did
Mhm.
say that, I mean, and she is the first woman. She's also the first black person and the person of South Asian descent to serve as vice president. So, and stand for president. So, when he said something to her, can't remember exactly what, she said, she deflected the whole thing and she said, I think the American people want better than that. And she also said it's a tragedy that someone who wants to be president was to consistently, over the course of his career, attempted to use race to divide. So, are you saying that race is a divisive issue also in the
No, I
US?
think she used it very strategically in her answer when he raised the race question. That, he said that she's not black in that interaction with
Yeah.
black journalists, which was a very strange and silly thing to say because she has, if anything, identified more as an African American than as an Indian American for most of her life. Her mother brought her up as as an African American. So and she deflected very well. She pointed out that his apartment buildings were not renting to black families. So
Yes.
I think she turned it around quite well. I think her strategy is not to get bogged down in these kinds of questions that could potentially become, like going down a rabbit hole, and
Hmm.
it's not it it's not helpful to her strategy of trying to win this election. She has to show him as a polarizing person, and that's it.
So she did sort of do that. She did sort of do that.
Yes.
Manoj, if I can come to you, could we take a look at the stabs that were made on the economy that Donald Trump attacked Biden about? He said that the U.S. is facing its highest inflation under President Biden. He says it was 9.1%. I mean, it was only 9.1% in June. I mean, not as high as he's made it out to be. But there's also the other angle where Harris has, Kamala Harris has claimed that unemployment was at its highest under Trump. So how do you see this? I mean, these attacks on the economy. What is the actual story there? I mean, Trump has said he's going to bring in tariffs, but she's called it a Trump sales tax. So do take us through that if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the debate in its entirety, I mean, I agree with Ms. Sirohi. I think that her objective was, to me, to appear competent but differentiate herself from Biden. I don't think it was necessarily a case to demonstrate your personal story per se, but it was about demonstrating personal competence, poise, and the ability to be able to manage a difficult situation and difficult opponent while communicating some of your key policy objectives. And in that process, also, I think there was some very smart debate prep that went in, which with the jabs very, very clearly defined, and even the moments when those jabs were used. So, for example, she went after him on his rallies and the size of his rallies,
Yeah.
responding to a question on immigration. So it was clearly thought through as to how do you deflect that, and he took the bait. In terms of the economy, again, immigration and the economy clearly are the two big weaknesses for the Harris campaign. And essentially, what you're hearing is that most Americans tend to have or generally a larger population seems to believe that Trump is better on the economy, and they have this sort of, there's a certain amount of nostalgia for the economy under Trump. Of course, the Biden-Harris campaign, I mean, Biden no longer, but the Biden administration's argument was that, look, we inherited a broken economy in the midst of a pandemic, and there was lots to do. And we've essentially enabled a really soft landing for the US, where it's creating really high levels of jobs. Inflation numbers are coming down, and they're likely to come down in the months ahead also. So that might give her a bit of a boost. So there's a bit of two ways in that story, right? That there is a case that yes, people are concerned about high food prices and inflation. At the same time, and there is a certain nostalgia for the Trump economy. At the same time, the Biden economy has had its challenges, and Harris is inheriting that. And in this debate, what we saw is that she didn't necessarily outline a detailed economic plan. There was
She
some
didn't.
elements of a plan with regard to the child tax credit, with regard to housing, with regard to support for small businesses and startups. And in fact, it's a day or so before the debate, an entire policy section or page was put up on the Harris website, which is again not necessarily deeply granular, but it gives you some inklings of what's expected. A lot of it is continuity with the Biden administration's policies. You
But
don't
that's not a good thing.
yeah, and but it's difficult. I don't see any new ideas, and it's difficult for her to not own some of the economic achievements which have been there, right? The Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the investment in infrastructure. You've seen significant work being done in the US, and I think that is something that rightfully they should own. I think that's been successful. The impact of some of this is not going to be immediate. So that's the case, I think, that partly that she needs to make, along with obviously what she's doing, which is saying that, look, I'm going to be working for the middle class, and that's my differentiation from Trump,
Yeah.
who's essentially going to be working for himself, and his plan is to give a tax break to the wealthiest, which is
Yeah.
what he did last time. So that's the differentiation that they're drawing, and I think she did reasonably well to make that case in her convention speech and in the debate.
Tell me if we can come back to you, Seema Sirohi, on Trump's charge of immigration. I mean, he did say that some 21 million people had crossed into in America illegally just in the last year. I mean, whether the numbers are right or not, the fact is that he's also made some terribly nasty claims about immigrants eating people's pets. So how much truth is there to the charge that Biden did allow illegal immigration? And I mean, that Republicans are openly voicing their fear, saying that that USA is going to turn into a third world country. Plus, Trump has threatened to deport all undocumented workers. So, I mean, is this going to go down well? Is it going to help him retain his mass base? Because Harris did not spell out her sort of this bipartisan border security bill that they talked about, which he apparently didn't support, that Trump did not support. She didn't actually spell it out clearly enough.
Correct. So here's the situation. The 20 million figure is highly exaggerated. The figures from official figures put it somewhere between 7 to 10 million from 2021 up till now. Now, many people have been sent back already.
I see.
Figures are very difficult to, to get actual figures of how many disappeared into the country, how many were apprehended, how many were sent back. But most organizations that track this issue say it's between 6 to 10 million. Now, it is an issue, there is no question about it. And it is also a fact that in 2021, when Biden took office, he did say that, if you're oppressed, like, the asylum thing, the rules were very relaxed, and some of the Trump regulations were removed. So people did come, and it did lead to massive migration from Central America, even India, and even China. So it is a very potent issue, to the extent that cities that were supposedly sanctuary cities where people could take shelter are reeling under the number of people who they have to house, and they
Oh,
have to, give food to, and put their kids in school. The school systems in New York, in Illinois, in Chicago, they're reeling under the extra number of children who are coming in. So it is a fact. That is why in the third year of the administration, Biden did move with this bill, which then
mhm.
was killed by the Republicans under the instructions of Trump. Trump
I
said
see.
he didn't want the benefit to go to Biden.
Right.
This is the situation.
That's
And
very interesting.
yeah, Kamala Harris has to navigate this very uh, properly and cleverly, because there is truth to it.
Hmm.
He's not talking off the top of his head.
For
The,
once,
the stuff about Haitian immigrants, eating people's pets, that is just some
it's very
awful.
Trumpian.
Yeah, no, it came out of the right-wing ecosystem from some Facebook post. There is no truth to it. But he keeps propagating stuff like that because it sells well within this, MAGA crowd, the Make
That's
America.
right. Yes, and he offered her a MAGA cap too. So similarly, the women's vote. I mean, how much of an impact does Harris's charge the Republicans disrespect women's rights over their bodies? So, Manoj, what do you have to add to
Yeah,
the?
I
Is it
agree.
going to be a substantial women's vote that she's speaking to?
I think that's the date. The data is telling us that the women are more women are supporting Harris than Trump, and there is some sort of a divide also in terms of where the male vote and the female vote is going in this election in between the two candidates. And
Really?
I think abortion. I mean, if you go back to the midterm elections, abortion was a huge issue. The right to bodily autonomy was a huge issue. Also, you've seen states which are supposedly red leaning, where amendments have failed. And so you've seen changes in that sense, where a majority of the country actually seems to be in favor of, the abortion rights. And therefore, I think that it does help her. It's probably the strongest issue that the Democrats have in this election. And clearly, you can see that her response to that question during the debate, where she painted a deeply vivid and humane picture of the challenges that somebody faces because of because
Yeah,
of
she
being
talked about rape
exactly.
victims having to go through the full pregnancy. Yeah,
Exactly. So the way she handled that clearly, I mean, I would assume that that would have struck a chord with a lot of people. So yeah, that's probably their strongest suit, and that's if that's the issue that this election would be voted on, you'll see Harris winning. But that's not the only issue.
but but at the same time, I mean, Biden's track record, and with that, Kamala Harris's track record in governance has not been the greatest, right? I mean, Biden has an abysmal approval rating. Cost of living is high. The borders are, as we've discussed, are porous. And so the Israel and Ukraine are two wars that they've got embroiled in. So there is a fear also that they've got trapped in a war which is totally unnecessary. So don't you think all of this adds up to a very anti I mean, that she will have to deal with it. I mean, she'll face the consequences of the fallout of Biden's unpopularity. Seema?
Uh, yes, you're right that they have two wars on their hands, but at the same time, the issue is that Trump doesn't really have a plan, except to say that if he were president, Putin wouldn't have attacked Ukraine. Well, there's no way of knowing that. Um, and he says that if he becomes president again, the war will stop. He'll manage it somehow. But I don't know how many people can have confidence in that. In terms of the economy, the Biden administration did inherit a very dire situation with the pandemic and everything. So they did manage to bring it on an even keel. Maybe they stimulated the economy too much, so therefore the inflation is high. There are opinions about that. But overall record is pretty good. They have passed a lot of major legislation. That is why you see the electorate divided so evenly. It's 55, 45 or 48, something. So
Actually,
people can't make up their minds because there are good things about the Biden administration, uh, and there are negative things. But Trump means an entirely new uh, situation, and people do remember what happened last time he was in the White House. And they
ah,
remember the chaos and the January 6th assault on Capitol. So that
mm,
is why I think
that's
that
fine.
this is so much on the razor's edge, this election.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's true. But most American elections seem to be going in that direction. Manoj, you had something to say?
yeah. If I can just add to that, so just to quickly go back on the immigration issue. So a lot of the immigration issue is about, you know, low skilled
Connection.
individuals, refugees, and asylum
Yeah.
seekers.
Yeah,
Uh,
Manoj.
so I was saying that a lot of the immigration conversation, usually during elections, is about low skilled people migrating, asylum seekers, refugees, so on and so forth. And of course, from the Republican side, we've heard things like criminals and all that. I really wish that, although there is no electoral upside to it, but I really wish that these conversations could also be about things like how do you get high skilled people into, the United States? How do you build those sorts of networks? How do you expand the knowledge economy and things like that? But I understand that does not have political and electoral salience in that sense. So that's just an analyst wishing something. But on the issue of foreign policy, um, I I think that the Biden administration has done fairly well. I understand that there is a war in Ukraine going on. I understand that there is a situation in Gaza. There's a war going on over there. I think that given the structural challenges and the relative decline of US power around the world, and the ability of the United States to impose its will around the world over the last 15, 20 years, I think that given the challenges that it faces, it's done remarkably well. It's down the right path. The idea of investing in American strength, the idea of building back alliances and new partnerships, the idea of focusing your energies on certain kinds of factors like China and Russia. I think that from an American interest perspective, that makes sense. It is also beneficial from an Indian interest perspective. So the only caveat that I would add to that is that, I would like the war in Ukraine, of course, to end. I would like both those wars to end, but the war in Ukraine in particular, because that allows the United States to focus more energy potentially on the Indo-Pacific as a region, right? Despite that, so far, we've seen the Biden administration manage both theaters reasonably well. At the same time, implement what is a really tricky economic de-risking policy, because the concept of security is so broad in this day and age. So I think that there are lots of positives in terms of how the Biden administration has gone about its foreign policy. Of course, there are failures, but in general, I would net put it as a positive. And there is lots of continuity with
So,
Trump.
are you saying that if Kamala Harris does win, then she will carry on the Biden legacy, or and that Trump could overturn it?
Look, I think from what we've heard from the Harris campaign so far, we've not necessarily heard of a different position on foreign policy. Or at least I have not come across. And even on their policy page, they don't discuss anything specifically different. And neither does Harris. Neither did Harris in the debate articulate a different policy position from Biden on any of those issues. Now, I understand it's very difficult for her, even if she wants to do that, because Biden is still president.
That's right.
It's really difficult, and she is vice president, so it's really difficult to break on some of these key positions at this point of time. But I don't necessarily think that you will see a breakaway. I think you'll see largely continuity. Whereas Trump is concerned, look, it's really difficult to predict. I think the idea of ending the war in Ukraine, in one way or the other, is something that a fair number of Americans will get behind. Because it is difficult for the United States politically. You saw how difficult it was to pass the additional aid for Ukraine through Congress. So it's not easy. And you've seen even commentators who've some MSNBC commentators who will make the case that, look, if there is a deal on the table, we must seriously think about it, because nobody wants another forever war in some ways, right?
That's right.
So there may be some purchase to that idea, but like Mr. Rohi said, how does Trump do it? He's not spelled it out. And I think Harris made a very strong argument in the debate where she said that, look, your how you will do it is essentially through surrender, and that's not what we want. And of course, she brought it back to her domestic base. We're talking about the Polish immigrant population in the United States, and so I think that from a policy point of view, if Harris is there, we're likely to see far more continuity, which to me, from an Indian perspective, is good for India. If Trump was to come, you probably see far more unpredictability, which is not good. But Trump's record of dealing with India in Trump 1.0 was not bad.
We'll come back to India in a minute. I wanted to find out what we have to say about Trump talking about World War III. I mean, I'm sure a lot of Republicans do agree with him that on the fact that the US is embroiled in wars that it really doesn't need to be embroiled in. Will that see a change, Seema Sirohi, where on NATO, for instance, Jens Stoltenberg is now going to step down in the first week of October. So there's going to be a change of a person who runs NATO as well. So where do you see the US pull out from Europe, allowing Europe to handle Russia on its own, or will nothing change? And it almost looks as if Putin is waiting to see who gets elected also before he takes a call.
So firstly, not all Republicans are with Trump in saying, let Russia get away with whatever it wants, or, the Republicans are now captive of Trump, but that doesn't mean they agree with him on all foreign policy issues or all domestic policy issues. They actually kind of don't have a choice because he controls the party. If he is elected, in terms of NATO, yes, he'll be tougher. He'll probably demand more contributions from NATO, but I don't suppose he's going to pull the US out of NATO. In terms of Israel and Gaza, he also, again, doesn't really have a plan.
Yeah.
He's good friends with Netanyahu. Netanyahu went to meet him at Mar-a-Lago when he visited Washington the last time. Again, it's this, Trump has this great belief in the power of his own personality in terms of ending wars or changing world leaders' minds. He forgets he forgets that they have agency too, and they will do what is in their interest, and he cannot necessarily bend the world to his will. In terms of Indo-Pacific, I agree with Manoj that things will, whether it's Trump or Biden or Harris, I think the policies will continue. And because Trump was the architect of a more overt anti-China policy, if you remember, which the Biden administration embraced and built upon and did a really good job of it. So Yeah, so if Trump comes back, I'm expecting he'll
So
build
again,
further on that.
I really want to take up on Seema Sirohi's comment. So this morning I was reading a comment by Kurt Campbell, the U.S. Deputy Secretary, of State, who's talked about not just China. He's also talked about how Russia is fundamentally aligning with China in the sense that it's not only dependent on China for production of dual-use goods, which it needs for weapons, but it's also marine, aeronautic, and missile technology. That's something that, whether it's Trump or Harris, they will have to tackle China head on. Or do you think that it will be a lot more subtle?
No, I think that look, I think the idea
No,
of
you can't hear me.
United States as competition with China is
No,
something
fine.
that is now structural. And if you, I mean, if you just remove the presidents and the administration per se, but if you look at Congress, you will see over the last many years a slew of legislation that's come into place. A lot of it is specifically also looking at China, Chinese actions, Chinese actors. So to me, this is a structural contest that is in place right now. A lot of the impetus for even things like, at least in terms of rhetoric, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, in terms of the CHIPS Act, and focus on new technologies, focus on new partnerships like the Quad, a deeper engagement with India through ISET on again critical in emerging technologies. A lot of that has to do with what you're looking at as the future pillars of competition and economic growth. And all of that is to me structural. So I think that whether it is Biden, or whether it is Harris, or whether it is Trump, you will see that nature of competition continuing. I think that if you see a Harris administration, you're also likely to see this approach of competing while trying to maintain dialogue in order to avoid escalation or while continuing to compete. You're going to see that sort of dual track policy continue. If it was Trump, it's difficult to say because there's lots of unpredictability in how he approaches some of these things. His interview to Bloomberg
That's
sometimes
right.
talked about, look, if the Taiwanese want, they need to pay. If the Taiwanese want security, they need to pay. I think that those are positions during elections. I don't think they necessarily translate into serious policy later on. But that does have ripple effects on allies, right? Because the allies have again reinvested under the Biden administration with the US. And the US also realizes that if it needs to target some of China in things like emerging technologies and critical technologies, it needs support of allies, right? It needs the Dutch when it comes to chips. It needs the Japanese. So I think that realization across the system, to me, that exists. And at least it's demonstrated so therefore I don't necessarily see that competition going away either way. What Trump brings is a serious factor of unpredictability, but I don't think it dilutes or it takes away from the structural competition. The unpredictability impedes partnerships, but I don't.
What about Kamala Harris? What about Kamala Harris? She's never actually openly given a statement on China, has she, Harris?
So she has.
Manoj.
She's visited the region, and she has, and it's been in line with the administration's policies. So I don't think that there is anything peculiar, that she's not said or she's not done. I think that we don't necessarily focus on the vice president when they are vice presidents. We focus on people who are executing policy, such as the Secretary of State or the NSA or the president. So that's why. But I think she's been lockstep in line with the administration's policy on China, and I don't think that you're likely to see any significant deviation in how she deals with China from how Biden's dealing with China. I think this is how the system framed it was a challenge with China as a pacing challenge. So you're likely to see continuity over a period of time. It's not a short term, you can't make short term switches because the solution is
Yeah.
not. It's a long term competition.
If we could come to India, and Prime Minister Modi is headed to the United States, not just for the UN, but also for a Quad summit, I believe, which will give President Joe Biden one more opportunity to host the Quad summit before he steps down. So they're going to be meeting, the leaders of US, Japan, India, and Australia will meet in Biden's hometown of Wilmington, Delaware on September 21st, ahead of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. So how does India figure in this great game, Seema Sirohi? And Manoj, I'd like to hear from you as well. Is the US stepping up its military ties to India as it is with Japan and the Philippines? I mean, how do you see Trump and Harris handling, India? Because it's basically being pushed forward as the sort of bulwark against China, right? I mean, as you said, Manoj, the semiconductor, sort of superpower in the region. Seema, let me come to you first because I cut you off in the beginning when you were talking about India.
On India, there's bipartisan consensus in Washington, D.C. That will continue, whether it's Harris or whether it's Trump back in the White House. So both parties recognize that's actually one thing they agree on is that China is a challenge for America's primacy in the world and that it has to be countered. Now, the question might be whether Trump might tinker at the edges with the policy that Biden has built, which is competition but not confrontation. So,
Ah,
trying to not let it erupt into a hot war with China, because yes, US today is not really in a position to open multiple fronts. It's already stretched trying to help Ukraine and help Israel with weapons and diplomatic support and what have you. So, but at the same time, there is full understanding in Washington, D.C., that China is out to displace America as number one. In that quest of not letting it happen, India is very important because India is the only large country in Asia, and India has China on its borders, that the Americans will want on their side. And so India will be important from that point of view.
whether it's
Quad,
Trump or Harris,
yes,
they're going to
and
be.
again, Quad was devised and revised and revived for precisely this reason. Remember, Quad's idea came way back when there was a tsunami, and then it
That's right.
died because neither Australia nor India wanted to get on the wrong side of China, because
Hmm.
China objected to all these four democracies coming together. But now the game is too far gone, and everybody's on board, India especially. So, for India, Quad is a very important instrument.
Manoj, what do you have to say about that? I mean, do you think that India is on board, or is it being torn, by its connections to Vladimir Putin and Russia, and wanting to stay friends with Washington?
No, I think that of course there are pulls and pressures of different interests, but I think that, let me just take you back to a couple of years ago when the war in Ukraine started. The Indian Parliament had a debate on the war in Ukraine. I encourage people to go and look at that discussion and debate. You heard many MPs from very different parties talk about the problem of Russia's relationship with China.
Hmm.
Yes, there is a reflexive sense of anxiety when it comes to dealing with the US within Indian public discourse and media discourse, but you don't hear that from government, and neither do you necessarily hear that from political elite, particularly when they're in power, because I think
Yeah.
there's a recognition that this is probably the most important relationship for India, when it comes to its own interests of development and security, but also in terms of the emerging sort of new world order that we are heading towards. So I think that from an Indian point of view, also there is this recognition. Will there be frictions in the relationship? Of course, there will be frictions. What has been encouraging to see over the last couple of years, particularly since the war in Ukraine has begun, is that both sides have managed to maintain constant communication, which has been through which they've been able to at least diffuse some of the stressors that might exist. I think the Indian foreign minister had said this during a visit to DC some time back, that When I hear anxieties about the India-US relationship in the media discourse, I feel that that the public, and I'm paraphrasing him, of course, that I feel that the public opinion is far behind where the government-to-government relationship is, and I think
Wow.
I think that's a reality. That yes, what we hear on Twitter in terms of a raucous Twitter discussion in India, that doesn't necessarily reflect government policy as much, and a lot of that has to do with what plays well to domestic politics also. But I think that in general, you will see Indian policy continuity recognizing, the fact that the US is an indispensable part of India's rise also. And I think if you go back to the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, it also acknowledges that. So there is deep complementarity in terms of that strategic objective, despite where you may have specific issues or interests where you may have differences. And those need not just be Russia or Bangladesh, they can also be on issues of climate change. So you can have these differences,
And
have
democracy.
strategic congruence.
Yes.
Yeah.
And comments about democracy. So finally, we have a presidential candidate in Harris who is of part Indian origin, as everybody knows. So she may not make a big deal about it. But I have a question. I mean, doesn't that have an impact on how Indian Americans? Won't it have an impact on how Indian Americans in the US vote? I mean, one hears that the Republicans have a very strong base among the Indian American community. I mean, J.D. Vance's wife is of Indian origin too. So, how does that actually work in the American voter base, the Indian American voter base? Seema.
Okay. So, people are very excited. The Indian American community is very excited about Kamala Harris being the nominee. And then lots and lots of WhatsApp groups coming up. Remember that mostly 60% of the Indian American vote goes to Democrats
I
traditionally.
see.
Yes, it is not correct to say that Republicans have a strong base in no. They may make more noise, but that's a very new phenomenon that they have some growing sort of set of people, Indian Americans, who are supporting Trump. But the large number of Indian Americans are with the Democrats, mainly because they feel more included. They also find them more accepting of their faith, religion, because Republicans have so much emphasis on Christian nationalism and things like that. Another issue is abortion. For Indian Americans, this is like crazy that, a woman cannot control her own body. So, Indian Americans are excited about Harris, even though she may not be as open about her heritage. I think, in my personal opinion, she's given enough weightage to her mother all the time, in the conventions.
Chiti,
Uh,
last question to both of you. I mean, now that the debate is over and all of these opinion polls are coming out, I'd like both of you to tell me where it's headed, because I mean, they're now going to focus on the swing states. Basically, Harris is going to make a big deal for make a big push for North Carolina. Trump apparently has got Arizona already in his pocket. And I mean, the Indian electorate does not understand this whole concept of, swing states. And, I mean, we believe in one man, one vote. So can you explain it to me on what these swing states are? And, are Americans really is it going to boil down to these 3, 4 states? Either of you.
Seema, do you want to go ahead? Because I'm not going to be able to explain the electoral college in a couple of minutes.
I was hoping you would. So it's a
One of
very
you
complicated.
should to teach us the electoral illiterate on what's happening in America.
You should have warned me, and I would have, refreshed my knowledge. Every election, I have to refresh myself on this electoral college
But
business.
I just read something on it, but it didn't make any sense to
So
me.
it is not, American people are not voting directly for the candidate. They're voting for the electoral college, and it's first past the post system. So whoever gets, every state has as many electoral votes as the number of congressmen and senators from that state.
I
So
see.
uh, electoral college then votes for the president. So some
So
states
do
are
you, who do you
completely
think will
democratic.
score? Who do you think will score in this kind of electoral college vote? I mean,
That
do you
is
think that's going to be the tricky bit?
obviously, yes, that is exactly the point, that it will be decided in these seven swing states, because the rest of them are either red or blue. They're completely, California is always Democratic, Minnesota is always Democratic, New York is always Democratic. So, and similarly, there are other states that are always Republican. So, in
So the
these
five
six,
states that I have on the list is Pennsylvania, Michigan, North Carolina, and is it Georgia? Georgia and Arizona,
Wisconsin also.
and Wisconsin. Yes.
There are actually seven states. So, in those seven states, there are certain counties. It comes down to this kind of granularity. There are certain counties which will actually determine, and will be determined by a few thousand votes.
My
So,
God, that's really
that's
something
why
else.
they are making a push and going to these swing states and doing more rallies over there. Today, I was reading that Kamala Harris is going to do community meetings, meet local media and radio stations and things like that. Yeah.
That's quite interesting. So anyway, that's another 50 days, odd days to go. Any concluding remarks, Manoj?
Yeah, I mean, my concluding thoughts are essentially that look, this is winning the debate, which Harris clearly did, does not necessarily mean winning the elections. Hillary
Yes.
Clinton won her debate against Trump. She didn't win the election. That's first thing. The second thing is that from an Indian perspective, as wonderful as it is that Vice President Harris is partly of Indian origin, I think from an Indian perspective, we need to understand that creates some sense of affinity, but it's not necessarily directly having going to have an impact on policy. If she wins, she'll be the president of the United States of America. She's an American citizen. We have to deal with her on that. So I understand there's lots of euphoria that happens in our media, but I think that we need to keep in mind that she's president of the United States. And while it is great to see people of Indian origin and Indian communities in the US thrive and do well, it's important that from an Indian interest point of view, our media and our discourse is also around what does it mean for India's interest rather than just focusing on identity. That's where I think our media discourse should be also focused on.
Oh, that's very interesting. But you obviously are predicting a Kamala Harris victory.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not going to put my money there. Not yet. If
Sorry.
I think it would be a true fool's errand to predict this election because 2 months ago nobody knew she was in the running for presidency. So I wouldn't put my money there right now.
And she is an unknown quantity in many ways to the American public. Seema, do you have a concluding remarks before we wrap this up?
I would just second whatever Manoj has said, that yes, it's too close to call. If I had the money, I wouldn't put it on either, because it's just impossible to say which way it will go. The next 50 days or so are going to be crucial. If she does another debate and does well, it might help. But again, debates don't win elections. Last two elections, Trump had a kind of support that was not shown through polls. So we have to remember that people don't give their true feelings anymore to pollsters. So all these pundits and pollsters, I take them with a pinch of salt.
Thank you very much. So if No one knows, which way the wind will blow. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Seema Sirohi, for being on the show, and thank you, Manoj Kewalramani, for giving us all your wonderful insights. Viewers, please do click on the New Indian Express website and Global Express to watch and share. Thank you. Thanks very much.